Hello and welcome to another episode of the PopCon podcast brought to you by Popular Conservatism. My name is Andrew Allison and I am head of campaigns. I'm delighted to say that my special guest today is Joanna Reeves. Joanna has been chair of Holborn and St Pancras Conservative Association since 2020. Holborn and St Pancras, of course, has a rather famous MP who is certainly not a conservative. Having graduated in modern languages and history from St Catherine's College, Cambridge, she took a PGCE, postgraduate certificate in education, at St Hilda's College, Oxford. And then she went on to become a teacher of modern languages. She ran to become the chair of the National Conservative Convention in 2024, and we will be discussing that later in this interview. And she also stood for Parliament last year, the general election, in Hackney South and Shoreditch. Again, we will be talking about that. But outside of politics, she is or has been chair of the Macmillan Cancer Support Annual Ball, which now raises over £500,000 each year as an event at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And also including politics, but a little bit to the side of what she does day to day as running an association, for example. She's founded and she also chairs the Conservative Friends of Neurodiversity, and she is a director of the Fellowship of Conservative Friends of Education. So welcome, Joanna. Thank you for giving up time in what I know is a busy diary.
Well, thank you for having me, Andrew. Lovely to be having a chat with you.
It's my pleasure. I always like to start these sort of interviews, finding out a little bit more about the person I'm interviewing. Did you come from a political family? Has politics been in your blood, or was it something that you came to a little bit later on in life?
Well, in fact, I do come from a political family, but not the kind you might imagine. As a baby, I was pushed around the streets of Walthamstow in a pushchair by my father, helping him deliver, well, not helping him, sitting in a pushchair while he delivered his Labour Party leaflets.
Oh,
He was a Labour councillor in Walthamstow, so that was the beginnings of my political interest, I suppose. My parents were both very active in the Labour Party in Walthamstow, then Chingford, so Waltham Forest. And really, I suppose I took a lot of inspiration from their commitment and their desire to make things better, to really put themselves out there and do something about what they believed in. It just so happens that my experience and my beliefs took a different turn and
mm, mm.
led me to being obviously now a very staunch conservative.
Yes, I mean, I was brought up in a Labour family as well. I mean, I was brought up in Bishop Auckland in County Durham, and that was not only a Labour family, it was a Labour town, it was a Labour county, it's the
Right.
Labour region of the northeast of England. You know, very few Conservatives seem to be around, so I know exactly what you mean. Was there a turning point that made you a Conservative? Because I have one. Was there a particular event,
Oh, okay.
something that happened?
Yeah, there was. It took me a long time to get to it. I think it was building really from probably my late teenage years, through my education and then my experiences as a teacher. And I can remember I'd had my children by this point, and this was something like 2003, I imagine, maybe 2002. And driving along in my car, listening to the radio, and Gordon Brown was saying, "Let no one say I have done nothing for education. I have just spent £500 million extra pounds on education." And being a teacher, and of course by then I was with my kids, my own children, but who were very young at the time. But having been a teacher, I know that you can't judge how well you're doing in any area, but particularly not education, just by simply saying I've spent X number of pounds on it. And I realized, oh gosh, that's just enough now. I really can't do this anymore. I then see I was a conservative because I knew someone had earned that money and I knew it was being spent in a performative way. Gordon Brown was using it to show his commitment just by how much he'd spent, rather than how it was spent. And so that was what was the absolute turning point. Although probably it had been brewing for some time before
Mm,
that.
mm. Well, for me, it was when I was much younger. It was 1984, and it has nothing to do with the famous George Orwell novel, because I think at that time I didn't even really know what that was. But it was the start of the miners' strike, and I distinctly remember watching the television news, no doubt with my parents, where Arthur Scargill said we will bring down this evil or wicked Tory government. So it was absolutely clear what the miners' strike was about. It was about bringing down Margaret Thatcher's administration. And then, of course, later that year in October, there was the IRA bombing of the Grand Hotel in Brighton. And
Yeah.
I felt I was 13 years old at the time, and it just brought into sharp focus that even though we just had a general election the year before, there were forces in this country who were determined to bring down an elected government, be it the militant trade unions or be it terrorists. And that just changed me. And it took me a few years, I think, to realize that that was definitely the turning point. But when I look back, it
Yeah.
really was the turning point that sort of moved me in that direction. So in 1987, in my little bedroom upstairs at my parents' house, there was a Vote Conservative leaflet right in the top. I mean, no one could see the thing, but it was my act of rebellion, I suppose.
Yes,
So it
you
had
knew.
yeah,
You knew it was there.
I knew it was there. My father wasn't very happy because downstairs in the front window there was a Vote Labour leaflet. So, but at least
Oh,
but at least he might not have been happy about it. But at least he allowed me to do it, and encouraged
yeah.
me in. So, I mean, at one point he never remembers this conversation, but he said, if you vote Conservative, you're out of this house. And he said, I would never have done that. He said, I can't even believe I said it. I said, you said it. He said, well, I just must have been a bit angry at the time. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
He said, because he said, I
I think
never would have done that.
I think parents always remember things slightly differently. I've had a couple, not to do with politics. I've had a couple of things where I've said, "Oh, when you did that thing," and my dad said, "I didn't do that." Hmm. But I guess it'll come to us eventually, won't it? So there we go.
Well, yeah. My 8-year-old son quite often says, Daddy, do you remember that thing that happened in October 2023? And I went, no. Well, why can't you remember? So he could say I said anything. Honestly, I wouldn't have a clue whether
Yeah.
whether I did or I didn't. But just the way that it is. But that's how my politics started. So as I said, yeah, I was a 16-year-old, and I actually campaigned in the 1987 general election, which of course Margaret Thatcher was elected for a third term. But it also took me a long time to realise, and I don't know if this is the same for you, that really, I suppose I'm not a conservative. I am a Thatcherite. I'm more classically liberal. Margaret Thatcher really wasn't a conservative. Well, she certainly wasn't a conservative in the mold that had gone on before. She believed in the post-war consensus. She believed in free market economics. I mean, some of the elections that went on in the 1970s was who can manage decline better. I mean, it really was as basic as that. But Margaret Thatcher, of course, was completely different. So I realised I just became a
Yeah.
Thatcherite. Mm.
Well, yeah, she was obviously a guiding light and incredibly inspirational. I mean, I live today by some of her quotes that she
Mm.
left
Mm.
us, such as the one about judging people. If you're judging people on anything other than merit, you're judging them on not the best criteria for success, which I suppose is a pushback against the um, having quotas, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And she put things very succinctly, like the problem with socialism is you run out of other people's money, or let people keep more of the money that they earn, which I think needs to be at the centre of conservative policy. And of course, we're having conversations now all the time, aren't we, about what is it to be a conservative? What are our principles? And Kemi, with her renewal, leading this whole sense of looking at what we believe in before we then go ahead and establish what
Mm.
our actual policies are, get to the bottom of what we stand for as a party. I think that Margaret Thatcher will always be some kind of patron saint, really, of true, proper conservatives. But of course, that was a different time. Although not necessarily that different. If you listen,
No.
as we do, to David Starkey and Mark Littlewood talking about the cycle that we seem to be going through, rather matching the cycle of the 70s, this sort of progress
Yes.
through our time period. being very similar to what happened in the 70s, and therefore being able to use that to judge what will happen next.
Yes, no, I don't know. No, I completely agree. And sort of what is the Conservative Party? I mean, it could be a philosophical question that could take hours for us to discuss and not even really come up with a definitive answer. Although I certainly know what my conservative principles are.
Yeah.
But the actual Conservative Party itself it's a complex structure, and it's not particularly easy for anyone to understand unless they have some sort of previous knowledge, unless they sort of read John Strafford's book on it all and have that detailed knowledge. But I just sort of run through a few things just for the benefit of listeners and viewers, and we will include a link to all of this in the show notes, just so you can look at it in your own leisure or whilst you're watching. But I mean, you have the parliamentary party in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and that includes the powerful 1922 committee of backbench Conservative MPs, and then they elect their own executive, including their chairman, which is currently Bob
Blackman.
Bob Blackman, thank you.
Bob Blackman,
Sorry, Bob, I know who you are. Of course, it used to be Graham
He knows who you are now, Andrew.
I won't even cut that out. We all have these sort of senior moments, don't we? It used to be Graham Brady, and the chairman of the 1922 committee is quite often described as the MP's shop steward who defends backbenchers' rights. You also have the Association of Conservative Peers, which is obviously nowhere near as powerful as the 22. But you've also got something called the National Convention and the Party Board, and there are other groups such as the Conservative Councillors Association, and then you have the Scottish Conservatives, and you also have the Welsh Conservatives. So there's lots of strands that make up the Conservative Party. Now, I think most members will know that the leader is Kemi Badenoch. Well, if they don't know, they probably shouldn't be a member of the party. I think most party members know that the leader appoints a chair, or in this case, co-chairs, Nigel Huddleston and Lord Johnson. But the chair of the National Convention, and we are going to touch on this because you, as I mentioned in the opening remarks, you stood for that role last year. But the chair of the National Convention is Julian Ellicott, and he's elected by members of the National Convention. But I don't think most members know what the National Convention is. Who are the members of it? How much power does it have? And then you have the party board. So who are the members of the party board? How much influence over the leadership does that have? And I haven't even mentioned things like area chairs and regional chairs. Many members sort of know they exist, but are these people elected? Are they appointed? I mean, we're all a little bit confused, and I think we've got every right to be, because it's certainly not explained. So I think the truth is most members of the Conservative Party don't have a clue how the party works. They know about their local association. There may be branches inside that association, or it may be a federation, for example, and they know that there is an executive in their association or federation. But then I think everything in between is just unknown until you get right to the top, where they know who the party leader and the chairman is. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Oh my goodness. Well, what I always say to people is go to the source. So I'm obviously being a historian and linguist by training, and the linguist part actually covering an awful lot of literature. It's always like go to the source and explain yourself that way, back yourself up. And so I would always say to everyone, just Google Conservative Party Constitution, and it's all there.
58 pages as well.
It's a lot to read. I'm not saying read all of it, but you'll get an idea of well, that's where it's all stated. If you want to find something out, there it is. It's all in there. So I wrote about the structure of the party because one of the things that I realised as an association chair and then standing for the National Convention is that most members of the party don't know the National Convention exists, let alone how important and how powerful it is. In my article, I divided it for simplicity, and I think actually that, but this really stands, it really holds. There are three areas of the party. There's the National Convention, which is essentially, it's the voluntary party, and that means the members. So the National Convention covers the members. It's got its own structure, and that's where you've got association chairs, of which there are probably around 600. I know there are 650 constituencies, but in some cases, there are federations which are groups of associations. So let's call it 600 association chairs, plus certain officers. So officers of associations where in fact it's a federation rather than association. Then you've got area, and then you've got region. And so we're in a pyramid now of associations, regions, no, I've got that wrong. Associations, area, regions, and then at the top you've got the 5 officers of the convention, and the officers are on the party boards, and really have a lot of say in party matters. Then you've got the parliamentary party, which covers the MPs. Of course, there are far fewer members of the parliamentary party. MPs actually and peers I'm grouping there. And then you have CCHQ, which is really the administrative centre of the party. They are there to really provide the support for the associations. And altogether, there's a board which links all of those together. There are representatives of all those 3 areas of the party on the board. And as a whole, we're trying to win elections and create a government that will govern with conservative values and principles and policies so that we can do the utmost best for our country. And that's it. As far as that's how I see it.
Yeah, but members are not allowed to vote for the chair of the National Convention, for example.
Correct.
So if you want to have influence in the party, you really have to become chair of an association, I suppose. Do you? Oh, well, do you? To actually then to be able to be part of those discussions and be able to vote for not, I assume, not just the chair of the National Convention, but also other officers around it as well.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that members can vote for the leader, and lots of people join the party, not specifically to vote for the leader, but I mean, maybe some do, but it's certainly a benefit of being a member of the party that you have a say over who the leader is, but you don't have a say on who the leader of the National Convention is, or the officers, even though they are actually representing the members.
Yes.
So it's only your association chair. If you're a party member, your association chair will be voting for the officers of the National Convention. And that's an annual election unless the principals are standing unopposed. And what tends to happen is, certainly for the chair, and actually, yeah, for the others as well, for the other positions, usually they're not opposed. It's very rare for it to be an opposed election, certainly during the 3 years that they hope to be able to stand for. But elections could take place annually if someone stands
If someone's
in opposition to the incumbent.
Well, I want to look at the chair of the National Convention in particular, because it isn't a role that many people know a lot about. It's the sort of title that you see in a conference handbook, isn't it? Once a year when you go to the Conservative Party conference, and I don't think that many ordinary members of the Conservative Party even think about who that person is from 1 year to the next, if indeed it even crosses their mind. But the chair does have important roles, and one of them that I just want to focus on is candidate selection, because they appoint the chair of the candidate selection committee and appoint other members of it. So basically, the chair of the National Convention has control over the candidates who are putting themselves forward general elections, and that's an enormous amount of power, isn't it?
It's huge, because actually the type of candidate we get really has a huge influence on the parliamentary party, because the caliber and the sort of style and the tone and the principles and the degree of conservatism of our candidates. I mean, those candidates, we hope, then become MPs, so that really influences the makeup of our parliamentary party. And in fact, so the chair of the candidates committee, the appointment of that person is solely in the gift of the chair of the National Convention. It's completely within his or her power. They make that decision. But not only that, there are 12 positions on the candidates committee, and the chair of the National Convention will have one of those places. His chair will have another place, and then he's allowed to appoint 5 others. So that's 7 out of 12 places are appointed.
That has a majority, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it's really an incredibly influential position in terms of the tenor of our party, who you have as the chair of the National Convention. It's not, it's a very, very serious role. And given how much thought there has been given to the candidate selection process that we went through in 2024, it's really important that people understand the role that the chair of the National Convention plays in candidate selection in that way.
So was it CCHQ's fault that we had so many seats that were vacant, no Conservative candidates standing? Was it CCHQ's fault? Was it the chair of the candidate selection committee? Was it Rishi Sunak's fault? Or people in Downing Street? Who do you think was to blame for the fact? I mean, I can't remember how many there were, but it was a couple of hundred seats, I think, wasn't it?
So there was so many vacancies when that election was called, and I know that there was a sense of, let's surprise the opposition by calling the election very, very sudden.
It surprised us.
We surprised ourselves. It was extraordinary in my view. So in my own experience as chair of Holborn and St Pancras, I had been emailing for months, probably a good 9 months, saying, right, we're ready for a selection now. Please, can we have our selection? Getting ignored, no reply. Getting replies to other emails that I was sending to the candidates department, but no, I was very surprised not to be getting replies over this. And of course, with Holborn and St Pancras, we don't stand a chance of winning. I fully accept that. Even me, with my sometimes extreme optimism, I understood we were not going to be returning a Conservative MP who would have knocked Sir Keir off his perch as our MP. But of course, the leader of the opposition and the man who was becoming looking increasingly likely to be the next Prime Minister, I felt we had an amazing opportunity to really put up some kind of interesting fight. It would have involved media, it would have involved, maybe some fun, eye-catching stunts, just harmless things, but also talking to the electorate that we have here in Holborn and St Pancras, who, well, there's a whole other conversation, but I think there's a way in with quite a lot of them for us. And it was very frustrating. And I knew that as soon as the election was called, that was when all that had to stop, because of course anyone standing as a candidate, any association also, all the activists would be sent to do mutual aid. We couldn't win, we would be sent to marginals where we could make a difference, and we were more than happy to do that, and that's of course what we did. But having a candidate in there, I was very surprised that it came down to the very, very last minute. The election had been called, and even then, we didn't get a candidate for quite some time.
Yes, well, I mean, Basildon and Billericay, that Richard Holden eventually got. I mean, on a short list. Someone said a short list of one. I said, well, it can't be a short list of one. You can't. There's got to be more than one person on a short list.
Well, look, controversially, I have sympathy for Richard, because look, he was the party chair. I know as an activist, he was all over the country running around supporting us. So I am someone who will defend that situation up to a point, because he did do so much for us activists while he was party chair.
Well, okay.
And his seat disappeared,
well, yes. Well, I know it did, and it's the neighbouring seat to where my mother lives, so I know the area very, very, very well in County Durham. All right, we will not beat up Richard Holden.
You'd have to have a heart of stone to do that, I think, which I don't have.
I'm not quite sure about that, but anyway, we'll park that to one side. But I suppose
Okay.
the real question is why, when John Barron announced, I think some 9, 10 months, maybe even longer, before the general election was eventually called, that he would be standing down at the next election, why
Yeah,
wasn't the process of finding another candidate started more or less at that time, bearing in
yeah,
mind that, well, I don't know what a safe Conservative seat is these days, but you would regard that constituency as a safe Conservative seat, and that
yeah,
whoever gets selected as the Conservative candidate will become the Member of Parliament for that constituency. So surely you want some good people in there, and yet
of
it was
course.
left vacant. What I'm trying to get at is, in your
Yeah.
opinion, I mean, do you think that the it was Rishi Sunak and Downing Street was saying, no, we're going to keep a few seats to one side, make sure we get some of our people in, or was that
Yeah.
being driven by Conservative Central Headquarters, CCHQ? I mean, did the chair of the National Convention, was he leaning on the chair of the Candidate Selection Committee? I mean,
Well,
what
look,
was going on there, or was it just a complete and utter cock up?
well, look, you hit the nail on the head. Depersonalizing it from poor old Richard. Although I know not everyone would agree with me, um, it was a timing. Yeah, we knew there were associations who were ready to select their candidates across the country, and that would have been pretty much the number of associations left without candidates when the election was called. Look, I'm not party to who said what to whom behind closed doors, but what I do know is that once you have called an election, you go into what's called by-election rules. And
Mm,
by-election rules hand power to whoever happens to be exercising it at the time. And that should therefore be the chair of the candidates committee. And if it wasn't the chair of the candidates committee exercising that power, then something had gone wrong because it was their power to exercise. Who knows what influences were working behind the scenes. But at that point, we were then in by-election rules, which means that the candidates committee could impose either a short list on associations or, as happened really across the country, one candidate was imposed on associations. Marginals and the types of very strong Labour seats such as Holborn and St Pancras or Hackney, where I eventually stood,
mm,
were imposed a candidate, and that was that. And I remember having the conversation on the phone with someone from the candidates committee, not the head of candidates, the candidates department at CCHQ, where I was very strongly saying, this is not what my association wants. My exec has strongly expressed a process. You see, I believe always follow procedure. So
mm.
I had my exec ready to absolutely back me up in representing them, that we wanted a selection. So all of that time, my exec was there wanting. It's the exec really within the associations that hold the power. But then by the time the election had been called, and I had Gareth on the phone telling me who our candidate was going to be, and I was saying, look, this is not what my exec wants. We just want to choose, and maybe we would choose the same person that you're giving
Mm,
us, but please give us the choice.
mm.
But he rightly said to me, well, those are not the rules now. The rules changed once the election was called. So
Yes, yes. Well,
that
but I do understand that, and but I suppose it's just getting to the bottom of why there were just so many vacant seats, and
yes, why were they held back?
yeah,
Um, in the knowledge that an election would be called at some point.
mm,
All I'm going to say is once the election's called, the candidates department slash committee slash anyone else who might be mixed up in having conversations about this, exerting influence, once the election's called, that's where the power then lies. The
yeah,
associations no longer have the opportunity to select. That's taken away. And again, like I say, always stick to the rules, and that those were the rules at the time that they were imposing upon us. Why we ended up with such a, we just hit the buffers and all of these. I mean, it was like a crazy game of musical chairs at the end. And, I was very much part of it because I was a chair and also I was an
And also
aspirant
candidate.
candidate. Yeah. And it felt like the craziest game of musical chairs. And then the music
Well, it
stopped.
was. I mean, we were all. I think I remember Theresa May standing up in the House of Commons. I mean, just before. I think it was, or maybe just before or just after Rishi had announced the election. But she said, if you want to know what's going on, I like the rest of you, just look at Michael Crick's tomorrow's MPs thing on Twitter, because it seemed to be Michael Crick who knew more about what was going on than anybody else. Which was rather amusing. But seriously, I was looking at that Twitter feed, probably refreshing it about every hour to see what was happening. Otherwise, I don't think we would have found out very easily.
No, absolutely. And I suppose in that kind of circumstance, you always have to ask who benefits. So who benefits from sharing that information? Of course, Michael Crick benefited because he had a really interesting Twitter feed going on. And that was great. We were all absolutely agog. I was very pleased when my name came through eventually. But I knew he was reporting information that was already known, that was official, but it wasn't being really reported by anyone else. The party wasn't announcing, I don't think.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. It seems like,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, that is the point. I mean, it could be that there was just a great cock up. Rishi took everybody by surprise. He took CCHQ by surprise, the candidate selection committee by surprise, and this was the result. I mean, it could well just be simply a cock up. But when you factor in the fact that people didn't really know what was going on, even when selections were being made. A lot of it seemed to be done behind closed doors in the modern equivalent of smoke-filled rooms, I suppose, smokeless rooms. But
smoke-filled rooms or something. I don't know.
It just fuels the conspiracy theorists, doesn't it? Now, I mean, I don't have an opinion. To be honest, Joanna, I don't have an opinion either way. I'm not sure. Nothing would surprise me with the Conservative Party. I have to say that, but I don't have a strong opinion either way. But the one thing that I do know is that we must never, as a party, be in that position again. So we have to make sure that candidates are selected in good time. Now, I know from a friend of mine, Andrew Percy, he was the Conservative MP for Brigg and Goole from 2010 to 2024. The seat was abolished and he stood down from Parliament. I know how many sacrifices he made from being selected, I think, in 2006 up until the general election in 2010. I mean, the guy was skint. He was, he was trying to juggle the work and being a candidate at the same time.
It's very, very hard. Yes.
An enormous commitment, but that was correctly identified as a winnable seat, and he did indeed win. So we used to select them quite early in those seats. Now, I'm not saying that we should necessarily select some more now, but I think certainly as we get into 2026, we want to give candidates in seats where we think we can win them back a good sort of 2 to 3 years, don't we, where they can actually sort of work the constituency and become well-known names.
Yeah, actually, just briefly to go back to your point about conspiracy theory or not, conspiracies or not. If we behave in a way where you can interpret it as being a conspiracy, then you're running into difficulties, because there will always be people who think there was a conspiracy, people who think there was not, and it just creates too much uncertainty. It's better to be like Caesar's wife, above suspicion. And
yes,
have I got that analogy? I hope so.
Yes. Caesar's wife should be above suspicion. Yes, that's right. Yes.
To go to your point on how early to select candidates, again, back to first principles. Let the association decide. Let them decide when they're ready, when they're in a good position to make a decision. Maybe there's something about the electoral year that they have locally. Maybe there are all sorts of local reasons that the associations, I would say, always know best. I think we just have to stick to that principle. Let associations decide, and if whatever they decide will be best for them, then absolutely great. And there are other reasons, in fact, that I sometimes go on to from there, because if given that our MPs select effectively our leader, we get given based on the recent
Yeah.
procedures for selecting the leader, which I don't think have to be the same every time, but that's what's happened the last couple of times. If you trust in the MP that you're sending to Parliament, then you're going to have more trust in that process. So I think it has knock-on effects that aren't always understood. It is hard for candidates when they are selected early, partly because of the time and financial commitment that really that demands. So great friends of mine who shall remain nameless took me aside recently and said, look, it's great getting candidates selected early. And he was selected quite early for the seat he was fighting in 2024. But he gave up his job, gave up his flat and rented it out, went and lived in the constituency and spent all of his time really committing himself to working in the constituency, which was a great thing to do. But he was really wrung out by that financially. So I wonder whether there's a way CCHQ / the associations can support candidates better. If you get a candidate who's selected early, shows commitment, is there a way we can help them? Is there a way?
Yeah, well, I think most members who I speak to, well, not most members, actually every member I've spoken to doesn't really have a good word to say for CCHQ, and we've seen there's been all sorts of problems there. You know, obviously job losses, enforced job losses because of the financial situation. But it is fair to say that associations do not have confidence in CCHQ, isn't it?
I think it depends on the experience you're getting from CCHQ. And to my mind, CCHQ is something inherently wrong with it. I'm not a person who, I mean, I certainly during my national convention campaign, although I think it was slightly projected by others that I was the anti-CCHQ candidate. I never ever was. I never said a single word against CCHQ because I think actually its value is there as an administrative centre, a resource centre as well.
But surely that's all it. Sorry to interrupt, Joanna, but surely that's all it should be. It's a service centre. It enables associations to be able to do their job. Yes, it vets candidates to make sure that, you know, that we don't have a convicted murderer or a rapist or armed robber or whatever it happens to be on the candidates list. All those checks are important checks. But surely after that should be it. I mean, the stories that we hear, and I interviewed Becky Walsh, who's the chair of Hereford and South Herefordshire Conservative Association, and she was on the candidates list last year. I interviewed her a few weeks ago, and you know, some of the stories that she told me about candidate selection in particular were pretty shocking. Instead of asking questions like, how would you describe conservatism? What's your opinion on the free market, individual freedom, personal and family responsibility, all sorts of conservative values? They seem to be more interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and box ticking exercises. And then they go, if I just finish this point, and then you can address the whole thing. But then there isn't just sort of one list that the candidates go on. They can go on a national list where if they live in London, they can apply to a stand for a seat in Inverness if they want to. But then you get others where the lists are much more restrictive. Now, you know, who decides that that's a good idea? I mean, my opinion when it comes to reform of candidate selection and reform of the party in general is that you pick someone. You say, right, okay, you've done all the vetting. They seem absolutely fine. There's no skeletons in the closet that we can see. We've interviewed them. They seem to be pretty good conservatives. That's fine, and then that's it. I mean, simply their name goes onto a list. And if you know, if I don't know, High Wycombe conservatives want a list of about 500 candidates they want to sift through, and they want all the CVs for 500 candidates, then they can have a list for 500 candidates. If they just want a dozen, because they like the look of those people, fine. But I think it should simply be then, you know, whoever's on the candidate selection committee, CCHQ, the leadership of the party, everyone should just step back from that point and just allow the associations to get on with their job.
Yeah, the associations definitely need space, as you say, to do their job. What I would say to the point about CCHQ is, yes, it needs to be an administration centre, and I believe a resource centre as well, the sort of national resources and
Mhm.
national digital campaigns, for instance. How that is, and also actually, as you say, running the candidate selection from the administrative aspect, not messing around with or interfering with what associations want, but providing the administration for us, as you say, so we make sure that our candidates are properly vetted and also that they're conservatives is another thing. Now, whether that happens or not, and on some of the experiences, certainly the experiences I had during my experience with the candidates committee, well, I've written about them. It's all out there, but were very shocking to me, very shocking to people that have heard about them. So again, take it back to first principles, take it back to the procedures, the processes. Who's in charge of the candidates committee? Well, it's the person who's been appointed by the chair of the National Convention, plus the other people who've been appointed by the chair of the National Convention who were on the
The
committee.
jobs for the boys, really.
Well, I'm not saying that, but what I am saying, that's where the responsibility lies.
I'm not saying that
So
you're saying that. I know I'm saying that I think that if you happen to be a good mate of the chair of the National Convention, and you're wanting to sort of get up that greasy pole inside the Conservative Party, then it's those sort of people who the chair thinks will remain loyal to them personally, are more likely to be appointed. I just think that that's human nature.
well, it depends how you're coming at it. So certainly with the candidates committee, as I say, first principles, what are the procedures? What is the chain of command here? And it goes back to the candidates committee. The chair of the candidates committee is in charge. The candidates department really are the administrative arm, and so they should be controlled by the candidates committee. Whether that was happening, I don't know. Um, I'm not even really sure who was on
Mm.
the candidates committee, and I seem to know more than most people about the procedures of the
Yeah.
party, and I don't know that. Um, and I do know, obviously, that the chair of the National Convention at that time, who was not the current chair, but his predecessor, really was responsible for constructing that committee, if the rules were followed, which are set out in the
Mm.
Constitution. Um, the aspect of I think the fact that a lot of people don't know how this works, the fact that it has so much the fact that the National Convention has so much power, or at least the officers do, I think tells us a lot about the way it's about people's reasons perhaps for getting involved.
Mhm.
It's I mean, to my mind, it's such an important body. Well, John Strafford said to me, knowledge is power. And if only a few people know about the National Convention, which truly seems to be the case, or it certainly was until I stood. I think a lot more people knew about it after that.
Yes, me
Um,
too.
yeah, the yeah, if people don't know about it, it's a lot of power. If it's kept quiet, you well, it's a kind of power which can do so much good. And if you're doing good, you want people to know about it and you want other people to get on board.
Mm.
You want to give the opportunities to other people. Let's find the best people and let's do what we can. Because like I was saying, it's if we can't sort the party out, we can't sort the country out. And goodness knows the country needs us.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I have no objection to people being appointed to roles if they're good at it.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
if someone says, "Well, I know of a really good guy. He's got a huge amount of experience inside the voluntary party. He's been on various selection committees," and I think this person would actually make a really good member
Yeah.
of the selection committee or the chair of the selection. I've got no problems with that.
Yeah. And
Uh,
that person can then stand up and take the responsibility for the good work that they're doing.
yes, yeah.
But certainly, I don't know anyone who thinks that the candidate experience was one which led to the optimal situation. And look what's just happened to us. We had the most appalling drubbing.
Mm,
Clearly, we have to recognise that whatever happened, well, we need to get to the bottom of what happened, and I don't know whether that will ever be possible.
Yeah.
We need to understand where we need to move from here. And I think to understand that, we need to understand what happened, what should have happened as well. And
Yeah.
with people not knowing what the rules are, what the Constitution says, what the setup is, it's very difficult for people to know what should be happening and to demand that.
Yeah, I mean, very briefly, because
Demand
I
it.
think, well, yes, yes. I think very briefly, as this is sort of one piece of the jigsaw here that we haven't really covered very much, is the party board. We've mentioned it, we've skirted around it, but I mean, how much power does the party board have? I assume no real political power, but how much power inside the party does it have in the way that the
Total
party is run?
power. Yeah,
Yeah,
total
so it
power
is.
in the Constitution. And in fact, I wrote an article on this. I was so surprised when I looked into what the Constitution says about the party board. I wrote an article on it, which I put on my website. They have total power over the party. They can do whatever they see fit to do, and there's a clause that says that effectively. It's made up of 5 members of the National Convention. We've got the party CEO, the party treasurer, a number of people who are appointed ex officio. We've got the voluntary party chair of Wales and
And
Scotland,
Scotland, yeah,
but not Northern Ireland.
which I felt rather strange.
Yes, it seems like an anomaly, but also there isn't a chair for England on the board
No,
either.
I suppose not really. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Mm.
The chair of the 1922 committee, of course, various. The leader can appoint a couple of people too, but the leader herself is not a member of the party board, although
Right,
she
right,
can.
right. I mean, I think there's the Conservative Councillors Association, isn't there? And there's the
Yes, that's
Association of
right.
Conservative Peers as well. So I suppose it's broad strands of the party. But yeah,
Yes, that's right. So
I think
it's yeah, a small group of people with a lot of power.
yes, yes, yeah. That's true. So how really do we democratise the Conservative Party more? What do you think? And what if you've got a wish list? I'm sure. I mean, you stood last year as to become the chair of the National Convention, which didn't go down terribly well in certain quarters. That's one thing for certain.
Isn't it, Andrew? What do you mean?
But people will just have to read reports of what went on. But I mean, you must have had some sort of agenda, something that if I become chair of the national convention, this is my manifesto. So, what sort of changes would you make to the structures of the party?
Yeah, representation of the members, I think, is the most important thing that the chair of the National Convention needs to be doing, because they're leading the voluntary party, and that's what they really need to do: lead the voluntary party, represent the members, be a bit inspiring as well, but represent the members to the board rather than the other way around. It
Yes.
shouldn't be telling the membership, well, this is what CCHQ wants you to do, because if CCHQ really is an administrative and research department, it's not really up to CCHQ what the members should be doing. It should be the other way around. And the membership is great. It
Mm.
truly is. These people work, all of us, we work so hard. We go out at the weekend. We take all sorts of abuse. I mean, at one point during the 2019 election, I thought I was going to get beaten up by this socialist worker guy, actually. And it was only a passerby stepping in, saying, "You don't talk to ladies like that," and shoving him that sort of stopped that from happening. So you find yourself in all sorts of situations which are very testing, and you're getting out there in the rain, in the heat, whatever it may be, talking to the public, and you never quite know what's coming at you. And local members know what their locality needs. So
Yes, yes.
the members are great, and their hearts are just so full of trying to do the right thing. But then that sort of gets diluted as you move upwards, and then you have CCHQ trying to guide. I mean, even things like during the election, of course, members are sent off and candidates in what are considered to be seats they're not going to win are sent off to do their mutual aid, which I did very happily. My members did very happily. But we were treated like cannon fodder.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That kind of thing, you know, just treat the members with a bit more respect and represent them. You know, why was someone not saying, no, it's not okay to speak to there was an individual from CCHQ that I was dealing with as a candidate who really truly spoke to me in a way that I'm certainly not used to being spoken in, immensely rude, immensely hectoring and bullying. And you know, had that been an employment situation, it would have very quickly become an HR issue. I would have made sure of that. But because I was just a volunteer, and there is the sense that the candidates are a bunch of sort of desperate wannabes who want nothing more than to become an MP and therefore can be treated however you like because they're not going to say no for fear of getting a black mark and not allowed back on the. I mean, we were told you will not get back on the candidates list unless you do exactly as we're telling you here.
Yeah, I know.
But also that meant being spoken to so rudely. So I know I'm sort of slightly digressing from your
No,
question.
you're not, because I think it's important, Joanna, because there you are being spoken to, probably by people who are good 20 odd years younger than you in many situations. Sort of these sort of whippersnappers coming into.
I was just thinking, how is that possible? But yeah,
okay.
okay.
But you know, they're speaking. I don't want to. One has to be careful when one talks about a lady's age, of course. But you know, they're speaking to people who are much older than them in certain cases. You know, I'm sure if they're speaking to you like that, if there was a candidate who was 65, 70 standing, they'll probably speak to them in exactly the same way. They feel that they have the right to do it, and not showing any real respect. And you know, telling candidates where they can campaign. Like, you are standing in this seat, no hope there, ergo you will stand there. Sorry, you will campaign there. Which you were told, I know you've told me about privately, even though there were other constituencies nearby that needed help, that you actually knew very well, and therefore actually understood the local issues. Because when you go somewhere 50 miles away, you know, and you knock on the door, and Mrs. Miggins in Acacia Avenue starts talking about a local problem, and your eyes glaze over because you don't understand the local problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose it makes it harder in that respect because so I had an hour to travel to my allocated constituency for mutual aid, an hour to travel back, 2 hours there maybe. So that 4 hours I could have spent in a far closer constituency where I would have probably done more good. I mean, you obviously when you're there, you find out what the issues are, and you know, you bring all of your nous and your skill to handling them on the doorstep as and when. But yes, there's a certain, to even be a candidate, you must have a certain seniority of experience. You've jumped through hoops, a certain dignity. And okay, fine, I know the local Labour Party are not going to speak to me very respectfully, but I do expect someone on my own team from CCHQ guiding me in how collaboratively we can all work towards getting the best possible result for our party. I don't need to be treated in that way, and I certainly didn't appreciate it. And as chair of the National Convention, I would have been standing up for my members and not wanting them spoken to like that, and making sure it, you know, it was phased out, stamped out, making sure it didn't happen. And if anyone was spoken to like that, I would want them to tell me about it so I could intervene.
Yeah, no, I completely.
Yes, I was going to say, no wonder I was a disruptive, considered a disruptive candidate.
Well, we need disruptors.
And lots of people.
But I remember something of Philip Davies, former Conservative MP for Shipley, Sir Philip now, said to me, he said, if every MP in the House of Commons was like me, there'd be total chaos. He said, you have to have those who are much sort of less outspoken, shall we say, and toe the line a lot more, which he makes a point. Just as I'm sort of wrapping up a little bit here, as I'm conscious that we've taken up just about an hour of your time so far. I think the members of the party, I mean, you said how fantastic they are, and indeed they are. I mean, I think it is the main highlight of the job that I do as I work with officers of associations, when I work with councillors, and try to canvass their views. And we at PopCon are interested in the views of
Mm.
people who are on the ground, who are representing their party locally, day in, day out. And I think we're interested in a way that perhaps the central party isn't interested. I've been to a number of events recently. I was at a dinner in February, mid-February, in Lincolnshire. It was Lincolnshire Conservatives. 130 odd people at that dinner. Guest speaker was Jacob Rees-Mogg, which I think may well have increased the numbers a little, but even so, 130
Yeah.
30 odd people. We were at the Freedom Festival, which is not a strictly conservative thing, as you know, which is at the University of Buckingham. It's run by the Margaret Thatcher Centre, but the majority of people there were conservatives, and there was over 200 people there interested in debating ideas. David Starkey was up in South Ribble a couple of weeks ago in Lancashire, after dinner speaker. Over 100 ordinary party members turning up for that, and indeed, just a few days ago, we're recording this on Friday, I believe, the 28th of March. I think I've got the date right. Um, just 2 or 3 days ago, we were together at an event, a Conservative only question time, organised by Queen's Park and Maida Vale in association with Holborn and St Pancras. I think there's about 70 or 80 people turning up to debate ideas. So the members want to be engaged, and the more that you engage them, I think the more that you will get out of them. The leadership has worked out, and this has been admitted by Lee Rowley, Kemi's chief of staff. I say admitted, sorry. I mean, he's spoken about this, that they've eased off on the "give us your money" emails,
Yes.
which I think is quite sensible, and until we've actually got something to offer. But I would just say to the leadership, just value the membership. You were a member once. You were there. You were a foot soldier. You were shoving leaflets through people's doors. You were knocking on doors, canvassing, and eventually you worked your way up. Or perhaps too few of them now don't work their way up in the way that they used to. And I certainly know that is the case. But I think my message, if anyone in the leader of the opposition's office is watching this, is value the membership. I know you're going through listening exercises at the moment, but make sure that they are proper listening exercises, not box ticking stuff, which I think this email we've had just this past week was just endless,
Yeah.
endless. But we don't want that. We want proper engagement with the party. We want proper democratic control of the party, and allow us in our associations to spread the Conservative message to the people we know.
Yes. Well, there is a party review that's been happening, but I'm not sure quite that it's positioned in a way to really get to the bottom of what happened. It, um, so what I've written about it actually in one of my articles, where I've suggested that it might have been better to have had an independent review. The the members are invited to email in to the chairman at conservatives.com, to give their views on what happened. But to me, although, hopefully, it's something. Sending your quite hard, some of these experiences that people have had, certainly that I've had, I feel they're almost too precious to share, just sending it off to a generic email address where it may or may not get read. Too valuable in terms of feeding back on what could be done better or differently, what went wrong. And I'm also not sure that the committee that's set up, and again, it's another committee, a committee was set up to carry out the party review, but one of the co-chairs of the party review is actually the chair of the National Convention, who was standing down at the end of 2024. So he had been the chair of the National Convention as we declined, and then eventually hit this horrendous defeat. So again, as we were talking about, it's better to act in a way that doesn't allow people to think, oh, there's a conspiracy there, or someone is covering
Yeah.
something. That's another example. If it had been an independent review, then maybe we might feel that it would get to the bottom of what did happen, which obviously is so crucial for us to find out. I've tried to find out when the review is going to be reporting back. The best guess I've heard is, again, from the current chair of the National Convention. When I last asked him, it was the middle of this year was the answer. So I don't know what that means.
No. Yeah. No.
I've got a feeling that perhaps it will just be left adrift a little bit, and then if Kemi orders, or her co-chairs in fact order, a really good independent review, I think that would be much stronger, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
members would have more faith in it.
Yeah. Well, exactly. That's exactly what I think. Yeah. Thank you, Joanna. I'll bring our little chat to a close. Everything that we've discussed in here, you will find details in the show notes below. So, a link to Joanna's website, some of the recent blog posts that she's done. You mentioned, Joanna, about the one on the party board, for example, and there's also stuff on candidate selection, and it's all fascinating. You'll also find links there to all 58 pages of the Conservative Party's constitution. If you've liked this, please like and subscribe, no matter which platform you're on. And also go to our website. The details are there in the show notes, popularconservatism.com, and become a registered supporter of popular conservatism. You'll find out what we're up to each week. You'll get prior details of various pop conversations that we do, live webinars that we do, and you'll also find links to all sorts of other stuff. You'll find out what's going on. You'll be in the loop, and we genuinely ask for your opinions, and we want to hear from you. So thank you very much, Joanna. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm sure we will meet again soon. I hadn't seen you. I hadn't seen you for a while, but I saw you last weekend, and then I saw you about 2 days later. So
We show up at all the best events, don't we?
well, we do. So I'm sure that we will see each other very soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. And can I just also say thank you to PopCon for just the amazing work that you do. It's really inspiring. And thanks for having me.
It's very pleasurable, actually. It makes you want to get out of bed in the morning because you feel like what you're doing is actually sort of affecting change, which which is always good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed that, please give it a like and remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. More details about us can be found on our website, popularconservatism.com, and you can also follow us on social media. Details about that can be found in the notes below.